Death row, the final stop for the condemned, the last chapter before the inevitable. But before that moment arrives, there's always a last meal, a final statement, and one last chance to reflect, if they choose to take it. In March 2025, 5 men faced their fate, 5 executions, 5 final moments that will make you question everything. This is their story. Brad Keith Sigmund, Jesse Hoffman, Aaron Gunches, Wendell Grissom, Edward Thomas James. Their crimes were heinous, their punishments final. This is their story.
There's also breaking news coming in from South Carolina tonight in a death penalty case making national headlines. For the first time in 15 years, a death row inmate has now been executed moments ago by firing squad instead of the electric chair or lethal injection.
March 7th, 2025, South Carolina. For the first time in over 15 years, the U.S. executed by firing squad. The condemned man? Brad Keith Sigmund. His crime? A brutal double murder fueled by obsession. It all started in 2001. Sigmund and Rebecca Barbar had been together for 3 years, until she ended things and moved back in with her parents. But Sigmund refused to let go. He stalked her, begged her to take him back, and when that failed, he planned something far worse. The night before the killings, he told his friend Eugene Strube exactly what he intended to do: break into the Lark home, tie up Barbar's parents, and force her to talk. Strube wanted no part of it. Sigmund didn't care. The next morning, he broke into the house and ambushed David and Gladys Lark. Armed with a baseball bat, he bludgeoned them to death, striking them over and over until their bodies lay lifeless. Then he stole David's gun and waited. When Rebecca Barbar arrived home, she found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. Sigmund forced her into his car, planning to drive her across state lines. But Barbar seized her chance. She jumped out, ran for her life, and even as Sigmund fired at her, she managed to escape. Within hours, police launched a massive manhunt. For 11 days, Sigmund was on the run until authorities caught him in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. He was extradited back to South Carolina, where justice awaited. Sigmund chose this method himself. Jesse Hoffman, executed by nitrogen hypoxia. Jesse Hoffman's crime shocked Louisiana. This is where things get really crazy. In 1996, the 18-year-old kidnapped advertising executive Mary Elliott in New Orleans forced her to withdraw money and then took her to a remote area where he brutally ended her life. Found guilty in 1998, Hoffman was sentenced to death. After nearly 3 decades of legal battles, his execution was set for March 18, 2025. He was executed by nitrogen hypoxia, a method touted as humane but still highly controversial. The process took 19 minutes, with witnesses reporting convulsions before he lost consciousness.
Louisiana has unsealed a redacted version of the protocols it'll use for nitrogen gas to execute someone. It comes after death row inmate Jesse Hoffman sued the state, accusing it of being secretive over how the controversial execution method is performed. The protocol says that the death row inmate will be strapped to a gurney, a gas mask and a pulse oximeter will be placed on the inmate, and then a spiritual advisor will take a final statement from the inmate. After a final inspection of the nitrogen hypoxia system, prison officials will turn on the system and allow the gas to fill the inmate's mask for up to 15 minutes.
Unlike other inmates, Hoffman declined a last meal and refused to make a final statement. His execution reignited debate over the use of nitrogen gas, especially after previous botched attempts. Aaron Gunches, executed by lethal injection. Aaron Gunches' crimes were ruthless. In 2002, he kidnapped and murdered Ted Price, then shot at an officer during his getaway. After his arrest, he pled guilty and was sentenced to death in 2008. Frustrated by delays, Gunches repeatedly requested his execution, criticizing the system for dragging it out. On March 19, 2025, Arizona finally carried out the sentence via lethal injection.
After a pause, Arizona carried out its first execution since 2022.
Aaron Gunches, put to death by lethal injection this morning, sentenced in the 2002 killing of Ted Price. Fox 10's Lauren Clark shares what the victim's family had to say.
For the Price family, after 23 long years, all the court battles and all the waiting is finally over. Although nothing could bring back their beloved brother and father, today his sister said she has a sense of relief.
Today, Arizona resumed the death penalty, and justice for Ted Price and his family was finally served.
On Wednesday, prison officials executed prisoner Aaron Gunches by injecting him with pentobarbital. The 53-year-old inmate's last meal included a double Western cheeseburger with fries, a spicy gyro, a barbecue gyro, onion rings, and baklava. He did not elect to have a spiritual advisor present and had no final words. He was brought into the execution chamber around 10:01. Witnesses say Gunches looked up and never glanced at the observers. After a few deep breaths and a gas that sounded like a snore, the color drained from his face.
He was pronounced dead at 10:33 a.m. Unlike many inmates, he fully accepted his fate and even enjoyed a final meal of burgers, gyros, and baklava. His execution was relatively uneventful compared to others. Edward James, executed by lethal injection. What happened next is absolutely shocking. Edward James committed horrifying crimes in 1993, attacking a family and brutally ending the lives of a child and her grandmother. After being featured on America's Most Wanted, he was captured and sentenced to death in 1995. His attorneys fought to spare his life, arguing to the U.S. Supreme Court that his deteriorating mental state makes this execution a cruel and unusual punishment. This appeal marked the final step in a case that has haunted the community for decades. It's been 30 years since Edward James was sentenced to death after pleading guilty to the murders. After decades on death row, his execution was scheduled for March 20th, 2025. Despite a 2-hour delay, Florida authorities carried it out. Witnesses saw him struggle to breathe before going still. Though he made no final statement during the execution, James had previously acknowledged his guilt, saying, "I don't want to die, but I believe it's the right punishment for what I did." His case, like the others, fuels ongoing debates about the death penalty, its methods, and whether justice is truly being served. Wendell Grissom, executed by lethal injection, March 20th, 2025. Wendell Grissom, a man whose crime rocked Blaine County, Oklahoma, was executed on March 20th, 2025, by lethal injection.
New tonight, the state of Oklahoma executed death row inmate Wendell Grissom for the brutal and random murder of a Watauga woman. It's the first state execution of the year here in 2025. Fox 23 in-depth anchor Rick Marinon was the state's media witness and reports from death row in McAllister on Grissom's last words and the surviving victim's reaction.
In many ways, this was just a routine execution. In fact, the state prison director says this was probably one of the most flawless executions to take place in a long time. However, in one way, it may have broken a record. The number of people, including the surviving victims of the crime, all eager to see this carried out once and for all. It was a day they thought would never come, but it's also a day they wish they never were involved with in the first place.
She was so young. And the last words that she spoke was, "Please don't shoot me." And Grissom didn't care and shot her while she was holding a 6-week-old baby. So for that, he deserved no mercy.
It was 20 years ago, a day Drew Kopp and her 2 children still remember and are grateful to still be alive after.
I had 8 bullet holes in my body, and there's still bullets in me.
Drew's friend, Amber Matthews, was visiting her and her kids at their Watauga home when Wendell Grissom and Jesse Floyd Johns randomly targeted Kopp's house in the middle of the night looking to rob it for money.
This is Gracie, and that's who Amber was holding, and this is Riley, and she was in the crib.
The home invasion turned deadly. Matthews was shot twice in the head while holding one of Kopp's then baby daughters, trying to shield the child from the violence.
I don't think justice is ever fully served because Amber's not ever going to be here again.
Kopp and her now 2 grown daughters watched with Matthews' family and friends as Grissom admitted he was high and drunk, but said it was no excuse for his behavior.
I feel like it was sincere, but it's too late. It took him a total of 13 minutes to die, and it took him a total of
This brutal story began back in November 2005. Grissom, after drinking whiskey with his accomplice Johns, randomly chose a house to rob. Inside, they encountered Drew Kopp, a man with his 2 daughters and their friend, Amber Matthews. Despite the cop's attempt to negotiate, Grissom pulled the trigger, shooting him in the head. Then, as Matthews tried to escape with a child, Grissom shot her in the back of the head and then again in the forehead. The violence didn't stop there. The 2 men fled the scene, but it didn't take long for authorities to arrest them at a nearby convenience store. At trial, Grissom was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and other charges. Amber Matthews, only 23, died trying to protect the children. Johns was sentenced to life without parole, but Grissom's fate would ultimately be decided in 2025. The night before his execution, Grissom was offered a last meal. His choice? A supreme pizza with Canadian bacon, half a liter of vanilla ice cream, and half a liter of Coca-Cola. But his final words changed everything. On March 20th, Grissom was executed by lethal injection. His final words? "I apologize to everyone for the harm I have caused. I deeply regret having instilled that hatred in your hearts. I sincerely regret what I did, not only because it brought me here, but because I can't even imagine the trauma, pain, and suffering I caused to the victims and their families. It saddens me greatly to have sown so much hatred in your hearts, because I am not the person the state of Oklahoma has portrayed me to be.